Now time for oral questions. The member from Lanark-Frontenac-Lennox and Addington.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Deputy Premier today.
Here we go.
Minister, you've introduced the blended sales tax, the largest tax grab in our province's history. This BST tax is a tax on every person and on their everyday needs. We're seeing layoffs, bankruptcies, unemployment, and a have-not province now on the dole under your watch.
Shame on you.
Let's forget the spin and the rhetoric for a moment and answer an honest question. We know you're like this cradle-to-grave government. We all know that death and taxes are inevitable. But is it just a coincidence that you married the two by introducing the BS tax on funeral services?
Hey, hey.
Minister.
Minister.
I thank the member opposite for his question, Mr. Speaker. And I would remind the member opposite that, first of all, with the very generous sales tax credit, the new home credit, with the cuts to corporate taxes, the cuts to personal taxes, the cut to the small business tax, in fact, Ontarians are getting a multi-billion-dollar tax cut, Mr. Speaker. With the assistance of the federal government, Mr. Speaker, $4.3 billion, with the urgings of all of the major economists in the province, with the urgings of poverty activist groups, we have taken a step that is designed to put this province back on a competitive footing. Mr. Speaker, I'd remind the member opposite that his interim leader, the day after it was introduced, said that their party supported it. The problem they have, Mr. Speaker, is they just can't.
Treat.
Spin. Here he talks about tax cuts, and the expense and the thirst for more money just keeps rising and rising with this government. We all know that the BS tax was stuck in to the budget against the will of your caucus.
I reminded the honourable member in a question over a week ago about the use of that term. He started out all right with it, and then he's changed. So I would just ask that he choose another way to describe the tax.
BST tax was snuck into the budget against the will of your caucus, and then everyone was whipped into supporting it. The hallmark of that government is broken promises. Promises are issued, they're broken, they're reissued, and they're rebroken. Such a drastic and sweeping tax grab, such as this BST tax, ought to be an election issue. Minister, why don't you break just one more of your many promises for me and everyone else?
Thank you. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, again, I want to remind the member opposite that, in fact, the government has brought forward a package of tax reductions that are aimed to stimulate growth in this economy, that will create employment across this province, that will help us get out of this challenging world crisis bigger and better and stronger, Mr. Speaker. At this time, in this age, Mr. Speaker, it is incumbent on governments to take decisive leadership. That is precisely what we've done, Mr. Speaker. This policy is the right policy. Exactly. It is challenging, Mr. Speaker, but I submit to the member opposite, to the members of this House, and to the people of Ontario, the consensus around doing this among all the advice we've had. It's the right thing to do. It's difficult and challenging, but we're committed to it. It's in the best interest of all Ontarians, Mr. Speaker.
Final supplementary.
Spin and rhetoric. You talk about stimulating growth. The only thing growing is your budget and your bureaucracy. You've banned light bulbs, you've banned trans fats, cell phones, but you haven't banned a bigger bureaucracy or higher taxes or higher unemployment. Minister, use some common sense. Be honest with the people and put this BST tax to them in the 2011 election.
Minister.
You know, it's interesting, Mr. Speaker, that all candidates debate in the leadership, not a single Tory leadership candidate said they would repeal the tax.
Remember, you let the media in at the last minute?
Seems to me, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite wants to have it both ways. This is not the time, Mr. Speaker, for governments or parties that want to have it both ways. It is time for leadership. It is time to build a stronger and better economy, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, this government is doing that. I invite the member and his colleagues running for the leadership of the party, if you're so opposed to it, stand up today, each one of you, and say you'll repeal it, because we are, in fact, doing this, Mr. Speaker. It's important to the future of all Ontarians.